Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well. This is Bobby Hackett. I think I can actually show you my video for a second. See if it comes up. I think it's coming up. There we are. There's Janet, Sarah, and there's Sarah's hand. So we won't have to do that for now.
Come on, Sarah.
Just to let everybody know, just how this works. On the right, you guys have a major screen that should say Bonner AmeriCorps enrollment process, and then there's a control panel for you guys where you can mute your phone or your computer, and where you can see, I think, the list of other attendees. And most importantly, on the very bottom, there's a chat option. And the chat option is where I'd like you guys to type in any questions you have as we go along. I'm going to mute you all because you may get typing, people may come in your room, so it gets a little loud if we don't do that. I'm going to start this off and facilitate it. Janet and Sarah will pipe in when I get things wrong. And we'll go from there. A couple other things. In the email, you should have gotten links to some of the material to download. That includes links to the step-by-step guides for the processes we're going to cover. And very importantly, it also gives you copies of the checklists, both for the application step and for the enrollment workbook step. It'd be useful if you had those available. We'll show some screenshots, but they are the final way when you submit stuff to us to ensure that you've covered all the material accurately, and so what you submit is completely accurate. So without further ado, let's just get started. The first thing is what is AmeriCorps? If you're brand new at this, actually the first thing is going to be a poll. I have a couple questions to ask for you. So if you look at your screen now, you can answer the question, how many of you are just starting this your first year? How many of you are doing your second year in your role here? And how have you been a little longer? Great. So it looks like a couple more you have to vote, but it looks like there's about half of you, a little more than half, almost 60% are brand new in their position. Another quarter are in their second year, and we have a couple of you are in your have been 5 years or more, which is great. I'm going to close that poll. I have another one, which is has to do with, is this webinar for you a refresher on AmeriCorps, or are you a first-time person just dealing with it for the first time? Great. So it's about half and half, which makes sense. I'm going to close that poll. We'll do some other polls as we. No, I have one more poll here, which has to do with how many people at your school manage AmeriCorps. That means they help with the recruiting, are touching paperwork, signing it, reviewing it, collecting it. I know that not all of you on the call represent the full staff that may be involved in your campus. So it looks like a little more than half of you are a solo operation. A third have 2 people, and the remaining have 3, which is seems about right from our estimation. So I will close that poll. Excellent. We'll have a couple more polls as we go along here, but let me just start with, okay, so what is AmeriCorps? I mean, it's important to know that, of course, it's a national service program, that our students are not getting a stipend from AmeriCorps. They're getting that from work study or from the Bonner program, but that they are receiving education awards. And the other issue here is that it's a federal program. And because it's a federal program, the paperwork, which is the point of this whole exercise, has to be perfect. We get audited. It's federal funding. We don't want to return the money. So Janet, Sarah are sticklers for all the details. And this webinar, along with our guides and the rest of it, are there to ensure that we have and continue to have probably the best managed Ed Award-only program in the country in terms of our processes, and probably, frankly, in terms of member development across the whole country. And we've been told that by the corporation. So we have very high standards, and that's kind of what this is all about. So why bother? Why do this? Just to reiterate, we're doing it because we're giving our students who have very high loans, cost of college has gone up. I think I heard twice as fast as the price of health care. And so any additional help we can give our students, we ought to take advantage of. And they're the figures for what students earn when they complete terms of 300, 450, and 900 hours. The the typical student loan or average student loan, students are coming out of college where they're between 20 and 25,000. That's of course going up. If you did AmeriCorps for all 4 years, you'd earn, you could pay down about a quarter of that. I mean, not quite a quarter of it, but you could pay down quite a bit of it. Again, that's the motivation for doing this. Just want to be clear about that. So we've sort of boiled down the process of managing AmeriCorps to 5 steps. Recruiting the members, recruiting eligible members, emphasis on being eligible, orienting and enrolling the members, placing them in eligible positions, so another eligibility question, tracking and evaluating them, their progress, and then finally exiting them. So in this session, we're going to cover just the first 2 steps. We have 2 other webinars where we'll cover the other components to this, but in this 11 o'clock webinar, we're just going to cover these first 2 steps, recruiting the eligible members and enrolling them. And there's 2 phases to this. So the first is, well, there's 5 phases altogether. These overall phases, so the first phase is recruiting the eligible members, eligible, in our case, students. And so what makes an eligible member to enroll? They must be a U.S. citizen, national or legal permanent resident. And there's documentation that has to go along with that. There are some other questions you have to consider. Does a student have a strong interest in serving? It's U.S. service, so when we get to eligible service, it has to be U.S.-based service. And and are they motivated? Also, I think since more and more students are studying abroad, we do also want to consider, is it worth enrolling them at a particular moment if second semester they're going to go abroad? Because the service abroad is not going to count towards the AmeriCorps program. It would count towards the Peace Corps, but this is not the Peace Corps.
And the other thing to remember at that point, this is Sarah, is that if a student plans to go abroad to study, then it is possible to suspend them from their AmeriCorps term of service. If they will go abroad to serve, they can't be suspended, and they'll probably find in that situation that they won't be able to serve enough US-based hours to gain their award, which is why we like to focus on that at the enrollment stage.
So timing of the enrollment is important as you consider what the student's own trajectory is going to be in terms of physically where they're going to be. Interest in doing this kind of work, of course, is very important. Now, if we're talking about Bonners, and Bonners go through a recruitment process itself, which is when they demonstrate their motivation. One of the questions here for some schools is, should we enroll first semester freshmen Bonners who we don't even really know yet in AmeriCorps? And the answer is typically yes, but as we get a track record with some schools, we actually then find out that it may not be a good idea for some schools to have them enrolled as incoming freshmen. Might be better to wait until their sophomore year. We can have that conversation school by school. So the big issue then here is the documentation. And what I'm putting on the screen right here is from the the application checklist. And that application checklist, which is part of the application packet you'll send, itemizes the specific proof of documentation, eligibility documentation. And you can see what the specific items are. I'm not gonna, it may be a little harder for you to see on the screen, but when you print out that checklist and you have the application packet, you can see it. But there's a lot of very specific items here. It's like, for instance, in that first bullet, state or county issue based birth certificate. And you've got those check boxes. Which one of those two is it? Or is it a U.S. Department of State form? And then there's specific forms that are eligible and so forth. So we put this on the application checklist so you are forced to specifically identify what the proof of documentation of eligibility is. And of course, you also include that in the form.
You will find that in nearly all of your cases, your eligibility documentation is going to be one of three. It's either going to be the state or county issued birth certificate, the US passport, and I'm including the passport card with that, or the green card, the permanent resident card. All these other things are listed because they do prove eligibility. We very, very rarely see them. And if you are sending one of those in, it might be a good idea to touch base with us first, just to make sure you have the correct form of the document. For example, the departure record, form I-94, will not necessarily prove citizenship. But I mean, really just to make it simple for you, it's going to be a birth certificate or a passport in nearly every case.
And please remember, if you're submitting the birth certificate, you must submit the photo ID simultaneously. If it's the passport, that will satisfy everything. It's considered to be sort of a master document because it's proof of citizenship and the photo ID all rolled into one.
Great. So the first step for you guys, the first phase is recruiting eligible members, and there's a specific guide on that on the wiki. And just so you can see it, I want to show you how to get there. If you're on the Foundation's website, Bonner.org, you'll see this Bonner AmeriCorps program page, and you get there directly that way. If you go to the wiki first, you'll go to Bonner Initiatives, Bonner AmeriCorps, and then we're talking about the National Bonner AmeriCorps program. So you'll click this link here, and you go to the same page. And so this in red gives an overview of the phase, and it goes through each of the components and answers some of the specific questions. And then there's actually the step-by-step guide, which looked like this. So step one, review the eligibility. It takes you back to the website so you can see it, the wiki. You explain the member benefits to the members, and that's explained here. Then you obtain copies of the required documentation, proof of citizenship. And again, it walks it all through, taking screenshots from our application packet, giving examples of the IDs that would qualify, gives you some reminders to read the orientation material, that kind of stuff. So these step-by-step guides are critically important to your managing the program. And the webinar is a good supplement. The checklist is all part of that, but you're not going to be able to remember it all just orally, hearing it from the webinar or following this PowerPoint. You want to be able to go back to these guides. Now, just a reminder, on the right-hand side of your, what's on the right on my screen, you have a control panel. The bottom of that is the chat option, and that's where you're meant to ask any questions as we go along. So just type your questions if you have them. Now, the second phase of this, of our overall process, has two parts. We've broken the actual formal paperwork submission to the Foundation into part one and part two. So you have to complete part one and hear from us before you take until you do the second step. So the first part is the application packet. The application packet, the overview of that, has four steps to it. The first is you conduct a pre-enrollment National Sex Offender Public Website screening before the members of potential start date. In other words, this paperwork has to happen before they're going to start, and this review has to happen before they're going to start. The second, and we're going to walk through that a little bit more in a second. The second is gather that required documentation. So you got to be talking to students who are interested to make sure they have copies of that and give them to you early in this. Nobody will be enrolled. No application packet's complete without all this paperwork submitted to us. So you might as well get it early. Then you fill out the application checklist, and you can scan the material and email to us, which is our preference, or you can put it in hard copy and mail it to us. We prefer that to be overnighted so that we can expedite everything. So now I'm going to walk you through, we're going to walk you through the NSOPW screening. And this is it's not that hard a process, but like all these steps here, there are components to it that are sometimes confusing, and you have to get them all just right. So again, this the NSOPW screening, a campus staff member has to do this, has to happen before the enrollment process, and the results must be attached to each enrollment workbook. I'm sorry, the application packet. They must bear an automatic print date 1 day prior to requested start date. In other words, this has to be done before they start for obvious reasons. And the results must be reviewed for hits and potential matches. And if all registered are not available during first try, campus staff must rerun screening at least.
No, that has actually changed now. You must run the screening until all registries are available. It's actually a rule that's changed within the past year as this website has become more reliable. In the past, you would often find that a state was down. Now you may find that a state is down, but within 3 days, all states will be up. So you can't send us the results unless you have a clear result for every state. If you do that, we're just going to have to run it again here, and it might have a negative impact on the start date.
Okay, I don't see any questions on this yet, so let me just keep moving along. There is, here's the checklist where you actually check the boxes for what the results were, and that the results are legibly signed and stapled to the AmeriCorps application packet or scanned to us if there's not a hard copy. And once again, we have very clear step-by-step guides on this. And I'm going to go find that right now. So if you go to the Bond AmeriCorps page, there's part 1, part 2 guide, and then there's a separate guide just on the NSOPW screening. And it gives you all the detailed background, gives you the URL to go into. It shows you what the screens look like. I think I have to update one of these screens. Conditions of use. So you just, this walks you through it. So you either print this out or have this on the screen right next to you the first couple times you do it. So you see all the steps, and you can see the 1, 2, 3, 4, and we explain 1, 2, 3, 4 in our guide, and it's very clear. We blacked out the stuff here, of course, about how it works. So this is essential to and the application packet has where you put the results. You attach the document.
And just to alert you to a challenging part of this part of the application process, you must be careful to input the student's legal name into the Department of Justice National Sex Offender Public Website screening exactly as it appears on their birth certificate. For example, if someone is Joe Smith Jr., you have to include the junior, or John Smith III. That has to be included in the last name box. You don't include a middle name, just the legal first name and the legal last name, but it has to be exactly as it appears on the birth certificate or the passport.
And that's, again, written right here on this guide. So read these guides and follow them carefully.
And if you're unsure, here's a helpful hint. Sometimes students have a double last name, especially if it's from Hispanic culture, and you may not be clear as to what their legal name is because they may be, using a truncated version. I would suggest just running the NSOPW on either version just to make sure you have it correct. And if it's done twice, that's fine. We just want to make sure we have at least one correct running of it.
All right, we have a question here. What about the legal name or married name?
it's whatever their current legal name is. So, but if you've sent in a passport and no other, no marriage certificate or anything like that, then they're going to have to register in the legal name per the passport. If you want it to be their married name, and first of all, they should have updated their passport, but you need to send us the marriage certificate as well.
Okay, we have a question regarding start date. I'm going to hold off on that until we get to that section of this. So I will read it out loud to everybody, and then we'll cover that. So once again, the application packet, you must complete an NSOPW form. The second thing you have to do is, the second step is gather that eligibility documentation. Either U.S. citizen or U.S. national or lawful permanent resident. And one of the following documents must be included: state or county issue-based a certificate, plus government-issued photo ID, such as valid driver's license, a U.S. passport, which of course has the photograph in it, or a lawful permanent resident card. So those are the requirements there.
Yeah, I just add to that if your member has a birth certificate and they don't have a driver's license or a state aid ID, there really is no point you sending in their application documents until they've been and got their valid ID, because we can't do anything with it. And in fact, without a valid photo ID, any sex offender check you run on the member will also be invalid. So you're just going to have to put that on one side and tell the member that they have to go and get their valid identification before they can move forward with their enrollment.
Part of the point, I think the larger point here, is that we don't accept and cannot accept any partial applications. Don't send us half the application and then send us the second half of it later. Oh, I'll get to that. That doesn't work for us. So we need perfect and complete application packets and enrollment workbooks sent to us with all the requirements there. So again, I'm just reiterating that the checklist page, or the section of the page, what that has on it. So our preference is that you scan and email the application packet. We do not have to have the original hard copy signed version in our hands. A scanned and emailed version will work just fine. A high percentage of our schools are actually doing the scanning now, and that's making life easier for everybody, other than our own printer cartridges are getting worn out. If you can't scan, and then we want you to mail it, but we really strongly encourage you to overnight it. And you might even send us a quick email saying, look, I've overnighted it, be on the lookout for it. When you mail something, you have to confirm with us by phone or email that we've received it. We've had numerous instances where people said, oh, I sent it, we never got it, and then they think the person's moving forward, and they really aren't.
And if there's a number of ways we have made that easy for you to check. First of all, when we receive your application and have run the background checks here, we will email you and say that that's been done and give you an earliest possible start date. The other thing you can do is look at their documentation tab in BWebbers, which will also show the dates of criminal history checks and earliest possible start date, which is a confirmation that we've received the application. If you don't receive either of those and you think that's really odd, I thought I'd sent that in a week ago, I would suggest you get in touch immediately, because things do go astray, and not very often, but we're processing a very large volume of applications at the moment, and we are trying to communicate as soon as we have processed each single one. So you should find that you do get a notification. If you don't, you should be worried.
And I'll add my plea to ask you to scan if at all possible. It makes your application process go much more smoothly, so that we can help your students comply later on with the start date that they'd like to have, which we will assign to them after we've run the criminal history check here. Also, the beauty of sending applications, or I'm sorry, if you do mail anything, send it priority mail and make sure it's completely sealed. We have gotten a few packets that were just not completely sealed, and that's not a good thing when you're sending copies of confidential documents, and you don't have a tracking method either if anything goes astray.
We have a question here. Would we like each application packet scanned and emailed individually or as one scanned document? For me, either of those works fine. So it's really whatever works best for you.
Okay, and again, a reminder, the application checklist must be included. So if you're scanning it, you have to scan this as well and filled out, checked off. This is here both to ensure that we see that you have all the material, but also if you read it carefully and you're going to sign it, lets you see that you have all the material as well. And once again, we have a clear guide on this. Let me back up here. There's the Bond AmeriCorps page, the application packet, and it walks you through each of the steps. Here, I want to add one more thing. We do want you all to add the student to Bond Weber's. And once you confirm the eligibility, we want you to add their basic profile information. You're not adding the AmeriCorps enrollment page. We handle that. That's actually locked to you. But you add them to the system. If they're already in there, fine. If they're not, they're new freshmen. They haven't, they're just starting with the program. We want you to go through adding them. And this first step is to check to see if the applicant already has a profile. And this is really important, because particularly when you get a large program, we want you to go to the student list, which is under the school menu, go to all programs, all statuses. The default is all programs active. So if they've been added but not activated in one of the programs, they won't show up on the all programs active list. If you go to all programs, all statuses, you'll see them on the list if they're already in there. And then at that point, you can add them if they're not on there. We have we have too many folks doing duplicate entries. One staff member entered them. Now somebody else doesn't see them because they haven't been activated in the enrollment tab. So we want it to, so that happens. Once you've seen that they're not there with all programs, all statuses, then you can use the pull down menu, available actions, and add them. Fill in the basic profile information. Here you'll see a description. Again, there's some more reminders about that. And then we have you go through the steps of the documentation that we're talking about, fill out the application checklist, and then scan and email it to us.
Just to revisit the adding the members in B Weber's, it'll do you a favor to do that when you send in the application, because then when you're following up, if the student's there and we've done the background checks and filled out the documentation tab, you can see them. If I receive applications and the member's not in B Weber's, I will send you a reminder to add them to B Weber's, because if they're not there when I get their enrollment, I will not enroll them. And I will also not add the profile for you, and that's going to delay the member's start date. So we just don't have time to do that step for you. So it's really important that you should get that one in there early.
There's also critical pieces of information we don't know. For instance, the student's email address, their graduation year. The email address is critical because that's a requirement for them to log in. When you create an account for them and save it, the system will automatically generate a password. You can override it, or the member can override it, but it generates a password. So if we're generated, you won't see that as well to give the students. So we really want you to enter the students, and we want you to make sure you don't add duplicates. Okay, so that's the first big part of this process, the application packet. Once we receive that and everything's good, then we let you know that you can then put together the enrollment workbook and hold the orientations. That's the second part. So the application does not mean the student's enrolled. It just means that they're now eligible, and we have them on record. We have all the eligibility documentation. The enrollment workbook and material and orientation, there are these steps here. So you have to run an orientation. We give you a AmeriCorps 101 PowerPoint, which you can use as the orientation material. The second, during the orientation, this is what we strongly recommend, the students will then fill out the AmeriCorps enrollment workbook. One of the things in there is that they attended the orientation. So doing that simultaneously makes sense. But again, you want to get the documentation, the application packet. That has to happen first. There's no point in going through this step if you haven't completed that one and we've reviewed it and approved everything. So then they do the orientation, and during that meeting, they fill out the workbook. You fill out the checklist, and immediately mail a hard copy. this has to be a hard copy. This cannot be a scan to us. The signatures have to be correct and dated. All that kind of stuff has to be legible and so forth. So that's a key step, is getting to a hard copy to us.
And it has to be the original. You keep a copy on campus in the student's AmeriCorps file, but we cannot proceed with the enrollment unless we receive the originals.
Okay. Okay. So you'll get a enrollment workbook. This page is a little bit out of date because it used to be a merge process. So when you see the clean one, you'll see that it's shorter. There's a different a checklist now, which I'm going to show you in a second. Yeah, here it is. So this is the enrollment workbook checklist. It's much shorter than the other one in terms of the amount of things that have to be checked. But what is critical here are signatures and dates. And there are some questions about that, but maybe Janet or Susan, Sarah can.
Yeah, the signature date causes a lot of concern. The member will ideally be starting their service on the day that you run their orientation and they fill out the checklist, the workbook, but that's not necessarily going to be the case. I'd just say that this checkbook list we have on the screen has been slightly modified now, so you'll see a different one when you come to do this in real life. When they sign their enrollment workbook, they need to date it on the day they sign it. Pre- and post-dated signatures are illegal. We can pick them up. I'm not saying that anybody's committing fraud on purpose, but it's just not a good idea to ever date a signature on the day that you didn't, not on the day that you signed it. So no pre- and post-dated signatures. The member can sign their workbook on their first day of service and before their first day of service, as long as that's on or after the first acceptable start date we've given you based on their background checks. They can't sign it after they start. Those dates are really difficult for people to get their heads around, and we do understand. So if you're not sure, check with us. But the rule is on or before their requested start date, never after.
And once we tell you what their first possible start date could be, ideally that's the date that they put in the member contract. However, if that needs to change for any reason, when the student's filling out the workbook, if they filled in a date that predates the date that we've given you as their first possible start date, they should simply run a line through the wrong date, correct it to the first possible start date or after that we've given them, and then initial the changes. It's a good lesson to learn that the member contract in the enrollment workbook is a legal document. It is a contract. So any changes can't just be scribbled over and altered. They have to be changed and initialed by the student and by you.
Excellent. So the orientation, we have AmeriCorps 101 you can download, and we have the guide. And again, I'll show you the guide on the screen. This is the enrollment workbook, and then all the steps that are there. So you want to follow those two guides carefully. And did I repeat this? Yes. Covered this ground here. So as we said numerous times, there's multiple foundation resources on the website. There's very clear step-by-step guides that you can print out. The printable versions are very nice to look at. And finally, we have these certification quizzes. And this is our way of ensuring that new people coming in to manage the process have understood all the issues or the details. Make sure I spell it correctly. And so I'm going to ask two quick questions here on our poll. The first one is, have you personally passed the application? I'm sorry, there's a quiz on eligibility for AmeriCorps, and pass means you've taken it and you've gotten a score of 90% or higher, which means almost perfect. You can miss one mistake. So it looks like, as I'm looking at the results, that, and it makes sense you'd be on this call if you haven't passed it, that 60% of you said you haven't taken it or passed it, and 40% aren't sure. So that makes sense. I'm going to close that poll. I'm going to ask the same poll. This has to do with the enrollment. There's a separate quiz on the enrollment process. I think we'll probably get the very similar results. And it looks like we are getting similar results, which is great. So there are a couple of different points at which you can take this quiz. These two quizzes, they are sort of 8, 9, 10, 12 questions long. They are questions that zero in on the areas where schools have had the most difficulty. And so they're also, in a sense, reminders for you. Now, if I understand the emails that went to you correctly, you had links to the quizzes when you enrolled, and an email will be sent to you as we close this webinar with links to these two quizzes. So you can take them, right away, or you can take them, later this week or beginning of next week. But we do need you to take them, and we need you to get a score of 90% or more in order to be certified as being able to do effectively the AmeriCorps enrollment process. Again, those two steps, both eligibility and the actual enrollment packet, application packet that comes to us. There are 5 quizzes, so there are other quizzes having to do with the tracking of members, which is the second webinar, and also the exiting process, which is the last of the webinars we'll do this week. So we look forward to hearing from you guys via email that you've taken the quizzes. We'll be able to check the scores. If you take the quiz that's based on this webinar, it'll actually tell you if you got the answer right or wrong. It won't let you redo it right away, but you'll be able to see that. So we look forward to hearing from you all. And if you have any questions, please let Sarah or Janet know. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to, just as we close here, I'm going to take the application and enrollment, the recruitment quiz, and make that available to people. And I'm going to do the same with the other quiz. So those are both available to you now. So if you have a chance, please take them soon. Thanks very much, everybody.